Well, welcome everyone. We'll give it a few seconds here before we get started on the Q2 power up here shortly. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, I'll get started here in about 10 seconds. I know we've got still people filing in, but I want to try to keep us all on time here. I know this is potentially during many's lunch hour. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the Q2 RMI Power Up on this wonderful Wednesday. For those of you that are serial Power Up attendees, thanks for joining us again. If this is your first time, we hold these Power Up webinars every quarter on a variety of topics relevant to resource management. So check out the upcoming topics on the Resource Management Institute's event page. You can check out kind of what's going on going forward. But today, as you can see from the screen here, we're diving into a topic that probably strikes pretty close to home for many of you in resource management, which is getting demand right, more specifically the demand data. So I think you will walk away with some new learnings here, whether you're an executive or a leader helping to kind of solve this organizational problem, or a resource manager that's really in the thick of it. So we've got a little bit of something for everyone today. So the agenda here, after following some introductions, I'll dig into, number one, why does demand data matter? So some perspective on that and what the RMR has really kind of seen through research and what would really rise to the level of needing a power up about this topic. Then we'll talk a little bit about an approach for getting demand data right through what we're going to call capture, perfect, and automate stages. Lastly, I cannot end without sharing a little bit about the RMI resources that are available, some of the support that we provide not only for career development but also for resource management in order for you to kind of help build a more collaborative learning network. So there's a variety of things that I'll share there as well. But if you have questions, as noted on the right, if you have questions, please use the Q&A icon. If we have time at the end, we'll address some. Otherwise, we'll follow up offline following the event. So thank you again for being here. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Greg Hensley. I'm the director with the RMI. I spent 20 plus years in professional services leadership prior to joining the RMI a few years ago. But during that time, I had the opportunity to also lead resource management functions, also build one from the ground up at another company. So you might see, me around instructing resource management certification program courses or consulting on the topic or speaking at a variety of events. But look forward to being with you here today and sharing more about getting demand data right. As I mentioned, just wanted to share a little bit about the RMI for those of you that may not be familiar. Since 2016, we've been dedicated to the advancement of resource management through one, our best practices and standards, which is the just-in-time resourcing framework, which I'll show a little bit about today. Number two is our market research. I'll show a little bit of that as well, which is benchmark data to kind of really help steer uh, action in your profession and also in the industry that you're serving in. And so we've got some brand new research that's actually coming available very soon that's titled Economic Impact and Value of Effective Resource Management. So be on the lookout for that. It'll be dropped on the RMI site under Insights. We also host, as you notice in the middle here, we also host a lot of industry collaboration events, just like this one, but we also host an in-person event in the spring that's called Resource Management Global Symposium. And then we also host a virtual event that's coming up this September called RMI Connect. So just wonderful opportunities to engage with like-minded peers. Training and certification, whether it be obtaining certification in resource management, even just growing your soft skills in the role, we kind of have it all here. So certainly opportunities there for you to check that out. And then lastly, RMI advisory services, which is something where we really want to provide an opportunity to consult and provide our expertise alongside you and help maybe enable your organization to build, whether it be this particular topic or build more of a broader RM capability, all in an effort of really trying to accelerate your RM maturity journey in kind of a pursuit of what we would describe as RM excellence. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get into our content here today. So thank you for giving me a little bit of time here to share about our organization and what we do. So let's get into getting demand data right. So it starts with just-in-time resourcing, or what we call JITR for short. And hopefully Hopefully, this framework is at the heart of how you conduct resource management and certify the professionals in your organization. And if you haven't seen it, it's a scalable commercial grade process solution for RM used by hundreds of organizations worldwide. It really is ideal for project-based service businesses when you want kind of the capability of how do I facilitate getting the right person in the right place at the right time, which requires really kind of that really strong ability to characterize supply and demand, which we'll talk about today, and how do we then align the two to really forecast what we want to produce and being able to have that visibility out in front of us. It also recognizes really kind of the importance and role of technology tools and governance to enable effective RM as well. So that's just kind of the starter and kind of the linchpin as you'll see as we start to walk through much of what we'll share here today. But demand data, our topic here today, is really kind of the cornerstone for decision making. It's half of the equation basically. As to what we're trying to put together here. And it's not just any kind of a meaningless input, and so we don't want to kind of brush it to the side, but we need timely and truthful data to really work proactively in allocating resources and forecasting revenue. The old adage is, bad demand data really kind of equals bad decisions at scale. And so, since demand data is half of the equation, when it's timely, trustworthy, and high quality, we're really able to proactively plan and understand our priorities better and even forecast revenue more clearly, something that I know executives and service delivery leaders really, love to hear. And then lastly, sometimes we, cannot see the forest for the trees that are in the way. And our challenge is not necessarily solving forecasting, which sometimes rises to the top. Rather, it's really about transforming the demand data from what we would describe as kind of a fragmented, kind of a static byproduct into a more governed, kind of real-time system that aligns sales, delivery, and finance. So once that outcome's achieved, resource and revenue forecasting truly impacts business outcomes. And byproducts and some byproducts and customers can getting the right people in the right place is really kind of some of those byproducts of that particular process as well. And so these are just very important things that we want to center around as we start to think about why does this demand data matter so much. But I did want to introduce a question here, and since it's summertime in many places, I wanted to ask the question, which is how messy is your demand pipeline? Does it look like this image, essentially an entanglement of pipes that kind of start somewhere and end maybe even at a splashdown? Um, well, we're going to talk through a little bit here some common pain points that we see that contribute to Bessie demand pipelines, and you may kind of recognize a few of these as I walk through these. And so the first one is if you've got incomplete demand intake, you're not really knowing all of the sources of your demand. The second is low confidence in demand inputs, so that trust factor there. Multiple versions or systems, or sometimes this is spreadsheets, where the demand data resides across the organization. Poor role skill definition, weak process ownership and governance, and then also a lack of accountability. Uh, that's always very important. And the thing that I really want to raise up as you kind of look at some commonality across the six of these is that I want you to take notice that over half of these require change management, some sort of upstream influence, or some sort of broader stakeholder commitment. And so that requires multiple parties be involved. So sales, delivery, leadership, resource management, project management. The point being is that although, RM can define and implement role skill to definition, demand processes, all these wonderful things, it's just as important to describe the business problem we are trying to solve and engaging groups that really kind of share in that responsibility. And so a little bit of insight here is I asked the question of kind of, are you then feeling the pain? Are some of these symptoms transcending into your world? Well, we have a way to assess that. And we distributed to our members and LinkedIn community of what we called kind of a capacity and forecasting assessment that I'm showing here on the left hand of the screen. It's free for a limited time. I highly encourage you to take it. The QR code's here. If you've got your phones handy, you can scan it and jump right in and take it. But this was an assessment that we utilized the same criteria that we use in just-in-time resourcing framework to kind of determine really the state and maturity of your capacity and forecasting process mechanisms. And interestingly enough, at the RMI, we really didn't learn a lot from the compiled results. We observed and kind of discussed this as the number one inhibitor since the beginning of our research back in 2016. And as shown here, nearly 70% have inconsistent or no trust in demand signals feeding forecasting. And I kind of step back from that and go, yikes. But that really wasn't the point of the assessment itself. Rather, it was kind of our charge to introduce a diagnostic tool to help you bring awareness of the business problem within your organization and to help you kind of tackle this area of frustration, bit by bit, employing some sound practices you'll learn here today. And so our charge at the RMI is to really help strengthen the profession and explore the intelligence. So tools like this um, kind of can bring the business of resource management and the value of that closer to the organization. But you'll see here that we're having some troubles. We're feeling some pain in the industry with regards to being able to trust demand signals. So as we start to move forward, hopefully we'll gather some things here that'll help you out. So at this point, you're probably asking, okay, this is all fantastic, Greg. Thank you for introducing this, but how do I actually tackle, getting demand data right? Well, I'll tell you, it starts with establishing what we describe as a demand life cycle. And we've employed this one for a few years and even incorporated into the certification training. It's very simple: capture, perfect, and automate. And what that means is capture, which is clearly identifying who owns and is responsible, for the data, and asking yourself as well, is it realistic? Perfect. Use your process framework to iterate through that data to then get it right once you've captured it well. And then once you've achieved that, then you move on to then let's look to automate through whatever automation tools you may have today and start somewhere small and start to work up from that. So we're going to follow this path as we start to work through things. And so we'll jump in to the first one here, which is the first stage of the life cycle, which is capture. And so capture starts with grasping how you capture demand. This is all about completeness of the data. Where is it? Who owns it? And that question again, which is it realistic? And so forecasting, remember, that number one inhibitor in RM that we report all the time, which is a direct outcome of poor demand data, it starts back at that source. So demand is often incomplete, it's inaccurate, it's misaligned to delivery needs, you name it. I mean, it is. It's a universal problem as we see here. I would submit that the top two lines that make up, let's see, about 70% of responses are operating with the perspective that either their demand signals are not trusted, timely, or reliable. And so that's kind of an aha moment for all of us. And so that supports why we see forecasting as an inhibitor, but that also supports why you're here, right? To help, your organization unpack all this and begin to kind of anew with proper capture processes. And so it's amazing for us, even not even just see, not even looking at this data, but it's also amazing for us to see organizations big and small that just do not have visibility. Demand data is the key that really unlocks that visibility. So we see many kind of operating a vehicle heading down a highway with only a rear view mirror as their navigation. And so, I mean, you wouldn't attempt that drive, and neither would I. And so, as we start to break this down a little bit, we want to be clear about demand capture. It's really a team sport. It's very cross-functional in nature, which requires us kind of stepping into what I would describe as unfamiliar places and in front of unfamiliar faces to get it right. And so the first piece here is to ask, where does essential demand information originate? So we know where to look within the organization basically to find the priority sources. And so we've identified kind of the most common demand origins, new sales activity, contracted work, in-flight project changes, recurring services, reactive emergency work. You may have one or two more to add to this, but for example, just for the sake of today, let's walk through thinking, okay, in our hypothetical organization, we have a few of these demand origins that we operate with: new sales activity, contracted work, in-flight project changes or CRs that can impact obviously our demand, and then a small number of reoccurring services there as well. And so let's consider then what's necessary to get data right. What are the necessary activities and data that are paramount to our capture? And so some activity goals we really want to establish are early visibility, standardizing that intake process, getting stakeholder engagement, and some level of clear ownership and accountability. And those are things that obviously cause us to really have to go up into the organization, have conversations and planning conversations before we can really kind of get into the meat of some of the process development. But that also requires us to come to the table with what kind of data are we seeking to kind of center these activities around? Do we have a definition of this? And well, it's the assignment data that we need to capture, right? And so you'll look at a lot of this and you go, okay, I think we've got that. I've got most of this. But if you cannot find it, we must really kind of define it. And so it's data such as getting those project opportunity names, win status probabilities, understanding what the structure is of that process in your organization, start end dates, role skill, effort hours, practice, product business unit, kind of what part of the organization is this particular assignment or work being delivered. And so all those things are necessary for us to get good capture. But then we also ask the question is what good capture does look like. And so let's start with engaging stakeholders. And so where we start with some of those activities is sharing, here's the business problem that we need your help to solve. And here's the outcomes from this initiative that really kind of benefit us both. And there's some cooperation, certainly needed here. And there's a few groups. We need sales, pipeline-driven demand opportunities. We need their help in this process. We need certainly the support of the delivery organization. So in-flight project-based demand signals are things that we're going to be pulling from them to help with this as well. And then the third is CS, CRP, or EAE. And what these stand for is could be customer success, customer relationship partners, account executives. Like I shared, these labels may be different in your organization depending if you're in professional services, an accounting firm, consulting, or even enterprise IT. The point here is that the cooperation and really kind of this reciprocating benefit of establishing good capture processes is important to each of these groups. It's important to them. It's important to sales in order for them to meet their goals. It's important for delivery in order to meet their goals, and it's also important for a customer success account executive team in order to meet theirs. And so those important things like being able to communicate estimated start dates for new opportunities. Another example would be quick response on availability of a role or skill for emergency work that might come your way. Or even role capacity forecasts. Here's a big one, role capacity forecasts that justify kind of new service go to market. You name it, all these things. We need to be able to engage these stakeholders. But that's the first part. And so with that, we've got to couple that with establishing a process. And so we've got to be able to kind of live comfortably with having some sort of a process here that we all agree on. And kind of the first part of this is standardizing that intake. So establishing that intake. Now, in your world, this might be a spreadsheet. It could be a SharePoint page. It could be some sort of resource request mechanism and a PSA PPM tool. The goal is that really for each stakeholder to recognize that this is the front door for demand awareness, project initiation, and accessibility of skilled resources to kind of work on the things that your customers are going to be working on in the most efficient way possible. And so we've got to be able to capture that in one way or the other. The next piece to this process then is really identifying what are the criteria and the cadence. So establishing the process by starting with kind of that largest flywheel that you see there at the bottom, which is entry into our demand pipeline. And so here we're talking about kind of win probability when we're thinking about demand signals, including everything, including everything is really not kind of conducive to getting demand right, for the purposes of business and forecasting. Most sales executives will admit with forecasting that they do not monitor all the demand. So uncover what they're watching and actively managing with the team because they're incented on meeting sales goal. And so kind of a rule of thumb there is whatever threshold criteria that the sales executive or partner is evaluating to kind of meet quarterly sales revenue goals, it's often probably, a good place to start. And so once we've kind of determined that demand criteria, then we move on to the demand submission. And so this is kind of the constructs around we know that demand can be very fluid. And so for purposes of a capture process, we want the ability to kind of digest information into outcomes and decisions. So we got to consider when and how often must demand be entered, updated in the pipeline. Sales may have one opportunity cycle for updates, but we have to think about in terms of that we're pulling from essentially three different stakeholder teams that are on different timetables. So maybe a biweekly is good to start, but as you process and perfection gets further refined, it may become weekly and automation gets into place. It may get down to daily. So this may become a really real-time view of demand. But there's a number of factors there. But the important part is that you're keeping those stakeholders, engaged. The last piece you see here is demand governance, and then we will do this with really kind of stakeholder help. But it determines really kind of how some of this capture will be kept in sync and who are the parties involved, what reports are we monitoring, how's that look, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the perfection stage. And so in perfection here, yeah, let me go ahead and jump right in. I'll go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to have a comment there, but this stage is really about utilizing a process framework to deliver accuracy and consistency around demand data to get it right. You can't automate bad data. Another important piece here is maturity is kind of sequential and not random. In order to get to higher levels of maturity, we need to be able to have accurate and trustworthy demand data for stakeholders and RM to operate successfully. So one thing that I'll often get is people say perfect. Well, we can't ever reach perfection, Greg. We can't reach perfection. You're saying that I got to reach perfection before I do automation? No, that's not what I'm saying at all. And so I don't want you to infer from the word perfect that you must achieve perfection before you can automate. Rather, I'm using the term perfect as a verb rather than an adjective, meant to kind of rationalize the thought process in your organization that you should be all about driving continuous refinement and validation of your data. It's not a one-time event or an every now and then event. It's rather, commitment to iterating through the data to get it as good as it can possibly be. And without it, you really do introduce risks to your forecasting quality, and you do minimize those benefits of the next stage of the life cycle, which is that automation. And so I do question sometimes from the data that we receive, like you see on the screen here, are we even trying to perfect our data? So another source of information I found extremely interesting, we asked the question, how consistently do you measure forecast accuracy and use it to improve planning? So for us, this is a strong indicator whether someone is focused on getting data right, or potentially they are, though just maybe they don't feel they have the right elements in place to utilize it successfully. But in this showing here, we see 74% here are either not doing it or inconsistently doing. And that's why we're engaging in kind of this perfecting stage, around demand data. And so in perfect, we talk about it. That it is necessary to get data right. And there's kind of a few key dimensions. There's dimensions of this data that are very, very important in order to really get through that perfection stage. And one place to kind of start is starting with role clarity. Establishing normalized roles, meaning roles that we assign on projects for both demand entry that is also then consistent with how we are identifying or labeling it amongst our supply of resources. And so we can have a much easier way of overlaying demand and supply. Second piece you see here is then skills taxonomy. And let's not get crazy here, but this should represent, relevant skills that the roles we just normalized deliver on the project work that we perform. So it's that simple. The third piece then is time accuracy, maintaining some level of realism around start and end dates on project and assignments. That goes for new opportunities, that goes for in-flight work. We've got to stay on top of that time accuracy component. And then the third, this one's a really valuable one, I think, if you've not tackled this one, is demand sizing. If you're operating in kind of a custom project and T&M world and working towards kind of clear demand sizing of service offers can be a really big help. And so when we see, for example, in this, if we see service A, that to us means that it's these roles and skills and allocations. Versus when we see service offer B, it's this. And you may characterize those in different ways, but why that is so helpful here from a data quality perspective is it enables quicker identification and digestion of demand into kind of real resource terms used within not only the organization, but also it enables us once we get into that automation stage. And so perfection is really kind of our governance, and it should also clear up kind of assignment rules, policies, and that should be fairly well understood across the organization. And so that's, again, we're gauging these stakeholders and so paramount as we start to move through this in order to kind of realize that true time accuracy and getting accurate levels of demand sizing. So how is it going in the field, you might ask? Well, I think based on this, we could use a little help. That's why we're sharing the impact of this, that clearly having some sort of clearly defined and governed data dimensions can help you get that demand data right. And more importantly, help really drive the behaviors of the result of achieving those better business decisions. And in this one, we talked about how accurately can you forecast demand and capacity data by time period. And so here we found again that we're not doing great, but some are managing to use what demand data that they have in order to really define forecasts. And so that demand data is being inserted in there somehow, but there still seems to be some rampant inconsistency there, which unfortunately can lead to distrust in data, the energy that others commit to the process that's been identified, and eventually the value of resource management to the business if we're not driving the capture and these perfect stages effectively. So we've learned over the years of employing kind of this interlock framework, and personally, I've employed it in multiple organizations and achieved really good outcomes. And what we've learned is establishing this framework serves several purposes. And first is that in order to perfect demand data, this is what really kind of helps bring people together. So once we've gone through, we've determined the dimensions, we've pulled this together, this is the hierarchy that really helps us align around the demand origination sources. And second, the thing that it does that you'll find is it creates this kind of accountable process cadence where these multiple dimensions of the organizations are involved in reviewing the exact same data. So you have multiple eyes that are viewing the world from different operational perspectives, and they're feeding information and updates to you about what they're seeing and whether or not it's accurately represented. And the resource manager in this particular situation really becomes kind of the curator of the data and ensuring that really all these parties are participating and updating their data. And so one way we do that is through the interlock report. And what that is we've talked about demand origins, data intake, dimensions of quality data. All these are contributors, but what the interlock report is essentially an iterative report used to kind of bring together and as a result of that interlock framework. So it's that central report piece or central hub that we're looking at together that's got this same data, demand data rolled up. So we have all eyes upon it and being able to kind of determine what's right or wrong and make updates as appropriate as we work through it. So all that then is to say we've stepped through capture, we've stepped through perfect, we've gotten data gathered, we've got it organized in a way, we've got the right set of eyes on it. Now the last step then is automate. And this is about creating scalability and efficiency, utilizing your technology and tools with that demand data that is fully captured and perfected. And so another piece of data I want to throw at you is my last piece, which I'm not surprised by the results here. So when challenged with demand data, yet we're trying to achieve more automated forecasting and capacity planning, it's just not going to really be a good or even a fun outcome without the foundations that we've talked about, and whether they're in place. Then they must be in place in order for us to kind of reach these the levels that we want to reach. And so we see here, let's see, it's about 50% have nothing. Another 25% are partially defined. So visibility is likely poor. We're driving forward using only our rear view mirror as our guide, as I mentioned earlier. And most likely there's probably organizational emergencies firing up, either financial or forecast related. And there's big time efforts, I imagine, going on to kind of pull together a forecast. And unfortunately, when you do those, by then it's kind of too late, really, to kind of represent something meaningful or trustworthy. And so that's why it's important to kind of diligently follow through these steps. And so I wanted to kind of talk real quick here as we kind of start to wrap up about what kind of some of the kind of the automation areas in which we can um, pursue a little further in our organization. And so the goal, I just want to remind, the goal here is really to reduce manual effort, improve speed and consistency and enable really kind of a predictive insights into that demand site. And so question often asked, okay, Greg, where do we start after we've shared some of these things? And maybe I've kind of checked the list on capture and perfect, and now I'm at the automate stage. Well, there's several areas that we feel that you can kind of jump in to automate. One is demand intake. That's kind of an initial one. What can I automate there? Maybe I'm moving from spreadsheets or forms into an intake solution or a resource request solution in my PSA system. Data validation, the ability to help with assignment data and logic that's going to evaluate whether certain things are right, that can pull back. My automation is telling me, hey, you've over allocated a resource. Is this your intent? Is this what you meant to do? Or is this just incorrect data? Things in which that can certainly help. Notifications are always helpful as we're starting down this process and notifying that there's new resource requests coming through. There's alerts around assignments that we're putting in place. A lot of this helps kind of tighten that communication that then gets kind of pulled together a little bit tighter when we have the interlock structure. And then lastly, which is kind of, we're trying to describing little steps here, but is integration. Can I connect the opportunity or the demand information in a way that's in normalized terms through my CRM into my PSA and onto my RM tools? And so at the end of the day, we want to think about this in terms of capture, perfect, and automate, but also repeat, which is by exploring the data or processes you think that can be better. And that doesn't have to stop. You can just start small as you start to work through this, as you've kind of seen early on in the capture process. So with all that to say, hopefully you pulled a little bit from this as you kind of captured how we capture data, how we want to perfect data, and how we move into trying to automate pieces of this. There's some opportunities I think that are ahead for learning and kind of connecting on some more of this. As I mentioned, several of these things we teach in our certified professional training. We've got some classes coming up, an in-person one in Cincinnati, as well as some virtual ones in July and September. There's also on demand that we offer as well if you'd like to just kind of run at your own pace without being committed to certain days and time windows. And then secondly, I invite you to get to RMI Connect. There'll be a highlight of a lot of really good information about how others are employing really mature RM practices in the organization. There'll also be several technology providers talking about how that information is being captured, perfected, and also how they're really putting it into purpose and then automating it in a way that I think is making our practice more efficient and really starting to embrace, the technologies out there. And so the RMI Connect is coming up in September on the 22nd and 24th, and this is really kind of a save the date for you. We'll have more information coming out soon on registrations. But with that, quick call to action. Number one, just getting demand right is a discipline. It's a discipline that you have to have in place. It's not an every time, every once in an hour event. So you've got to identify kind of your biggest gap and think about it in terms of capture, perfect, and automate. Define one or two improvements, that you can implement this quarter from what you've learned here today. Make sure to really engage those stakeholders throughout, okay? Number two, invest in data quality. So organizations struggle with completeness, accuracy, and alignment. So obtain really kind of a better alignment on engaging maybe one or two levels of that interlock framework into some repeated cycles there that can get really intentional before you kind of expand either the data and even the layers of that interlock structure. And then lastly, explore the intelligence. If you've got providers that you're working with, think about using automation strategically and not prematurely. And that's why we step through these stages for you. So determine what demand management tools are available in your tools with your technology partner. Ensure data perfections in place in some levels that are going to be required in order to really pull into this automation and use it wisely. And then again, identify those stakeholders because it's a win-win scenario each time you use these in order to really kind of improve speed and consistency. And so with that, I wrap up today on this topic of getting demand data right, utilizing the capture, perfect, automate. I want to thank all of you again for joining us here today and appreciate your time and being with us and look forward to seeing you again at another Power Up soon. Thank you.